Well, hello everybody. Welcome back to iNN's Headlines and Beyond. We've been on hiatus for the last 2 weeks while the Christmas season wrapped up, and now we're back again for a fresh start. We did some. I did some note adjustments to the notes. Took a look at some new things, and we're gonna pick off where we left off. And if you've been paying attention to the headlines, you notice that the ceasefire in Ukraine is over, and we're back to the old status quo. And the thing is what's not appearing in the news is a lot of what actually happened and what led up to the end of the ceasefire. And this is what I want to say is that, Obama stated that he wouldn't be using Adam Kinzinger's bill HR 758, which he signed into law. But it would basically what that bill does is outlines the grounds for a new Cold War. In other words, Obama, without coming out and actually stating, providing a declaration of war, this is exactly what Obama signed. He signed a declaration of war. And in this case here, because we are still within the era of nuclear weapons, it of course is a Cold War. But what's been happening lately with NATO, all throughout the ceasefires, if you sort of watch in the news, is you'll see that almost on a continuing basis here, right, that NATO has been expanding. NATO has been doing this sort of brinksmanship here. This is from January 31st. NATO is expected to station additional soldiers in 6 member states in Eastern Europe as part of its new anti-Russian strategy. I mean, they're coming out right out here and stating this, that this is an anti-Russian strategy. And I mean, how can Russia not assume that this is going to be a staging for an attack on Russia? When here, this is an anti-Russian policy. Russia really hasn't done anything wrong, except for not being properly European. I mean, I think what's been happening now in NATO is really bringing up policies. If you want to look in history, to find where these policies are, and they are historical policies. They're not brand new policies. They belong with the Nazi Party. And this narrative, the parallels between NATO and Nazi, has not been lost on a lot of Europeans. It hasn't been lost on a lot of some more independent people. But in terms of the overall general public view, it's been completely glossed over. And the thing is, what happens is you have these puppets who stand up in sort of in the media, like Jimmy Fallon or the Daily Show with Jon Stewart, Bill Maher. A lot of these sort of Obama's pals and chums in Hollywood out there beating the PR drum, creating a propaganda, creating a narrative that what's being done is noble. But the thing is, if you just sit down and take a look at it, and you don't get your news from a comedy show or from a comedian, and you actually sit down and do the research, you begin to realize that this strategy, one is anti-Russian, but and also it parallels the Germanic expansion policy. It basically views all of Europe and what it calls Europe to be European. Anyone who is white is European, and therefore should belong under the European sphere of influence. This includes Greece. This includes Ukraine. And you can see the policies enacted. Matter of fact, you can, if you want to follow the sort of pro-European, pro-white policy, and this is outside of the rhetoric of so-called tolerance. If you look at European tolerance, the tolerance is simply just rhetoric. Because you look at the policies on the ground, the Europeans are not tolerant at all. It's their way or no way at all. And that's not tolerance. Being tolerant to your own ideas is not tolerance. It's being tolerant, if we want to put it this way, to other people's ideas. And they're not tolerant to other people's ideas. They're tolerant only to the ideas that they agree with. And when they don't agree with something, all of a sudden the person is bad, they're evil, and you need to have regime change. And this is kind of, what we see here. But you don't, in terms of if you actually sit down and did the research, you did your studying. But I think this is not what you see when Amy Poehler and what's her name? That other one, I can't remember what her name is. Stand up and they were at the Golden Globes and they were giving their sort of monologue at the beginning. They were doing their little shtick, if you will. It was very political, but their position was that everything's all honky dory and that the left is doing a wonderful job of being humanitarians, and they're not. They're part of the problem. They're part of the whole issue here because the humanitarian left wants to be congratulated on their wonderfulness, and if you don't congratulate them, if you're not appreciative of their gifts, if you will, then they get very upset about this. And if you challenge their sense of humanity, their sense of right and wrong, their sense of morality, then they also get very defensive about that as well. And all of a sudden, the tolerance disappears. And in other words, if you do not agree with their particular views on how things are going, then they will not listen to you. Matter of fact, they'll shut you down and they'll simply, they won't hear what you have to say. So it's their way again or no way at all. So this is a sort of a picture of European tolerance. And they were also working, the states that they were working on in terms of the Baltic states, is Romania, Bulgaria, Poland is what they're looking at in terms of their expansion for NATO. What else is there here? I know that sort of this is no, this is from British media here, right? Because I've got some of these lines noted here, but not everything is properly highlighted, and that's part of the thing here. Is I don't know exactly what I'm going to say when I come down here, so sorry about that. General Philip Breedlove's idea would be presented to members of the alliance at the upcoming NATO summit in Wales. This is in July 2014, right? So we're going back here. We're sort of setting the stage for what's happening now. And you can see what the ceasefires really were. The ceasefires really were a way of rearming the troops. The troops have gotten exhausted. The weapons supply had gotten exhausted. They needed to resupply, and this is actually what's actually happening. And you can sort of see. We just talked about the expansion of NATO into more Eastern European states. That this is an anti-Russian policy, an anti-Russian strategy. And here in July 2014, we have General Philip Breedlove. His idea, which was presented at the meeting, a NATO meeting in Wales in September, says NATO's Europe commander advocates stockpiling a base in Poland with enough weapons and ammunition and other supplies to support a rapid deployment of thousands of troops against Russia. And now, this is the staging of Operation Barbarossa. Go look into Hitler's history and look at the Operation Barbarossa. This was the invasion of Russia back then at the time of Hitler. There wasn't a Ukraine. Ukraine was actually part of Russia. It was a central part of Russia, and Operation Barbarossa went through Yugoslavia, broke up Yugoslavia. This is how you ended up having Croatia in there. Then it went into Ukraine, and then from Ukraine it tried to go all the way into Moscow. Well, of course, the campaign failed because they really didn't plan their supplies that well enough, and as they got into Russia, they got bogged down in Russia, and weren't really sort of able to keep the supply lines going. And so what they're talking about here now, what General Philip Breedlove was talking about, he's talking about a second invasion, well, not a second invasion, because Napoleon invaded Russia twice, and he also failed. So this is Europe again, third, fourth time trying to invade Russia again. This is the second. This is a modern version of the invasion of Russia. Now they're not going to come out in the news and state that they're invading Russia. They're going to put it Russia's a bad guy. They don't like homosexuality. They're doing a lot of bad stuff because they don't like the European views on things. They don't have the same morality that the Europeans have, the same open social views. So therefore, we need to go in and take over Russia. This is the whole view here. But they're not going to come out and say they're taking over Russia. They're going to present it in a very defensive manner. They're going to sort of present that this is something that needs to happen. They're doing this for a good cause. In other words, they're going to try as much as they can in the news, in the media, to justify what's happening. And of course, as they do this, they create the narrative in the courts as well that this is something illegal. In other words, you often hear about most Democrats talking about the legal cause for war, the legalities of war. And as long as you can make something legal, it doesn't matter whether it's right or wrong, it's legal enough, therefore you now have permission to do this. This was the case that that Bush presented in Iraq. But Bush's sin was that he didn't include the UN properly. In other words, it wasn't a NATO effort, it wasn't a UN effort, it wasn't done under proper international law. Obama's warmongering was done properly within NATO, within the European alliance, within the UN, which is primarily European dominated and European controlled. In other words, if you look at the UN Charter, look at how the UN actually functions, you'll find that Europe is exempt from all of the war crime trials. So let's say you have a war created by the European Union, and that's what's happening now. You're having a war created by the European Union. No one European general will ever be charged because they're exempt from charges within the International War Crimes Tribunal. In other words, they cannot be taken to international court. They cannot be arrested. They cannot be tried for war crimes. These are reserved for the lesser beings in the world, the non-Europeans, who need to be corralled and be controlled because they just simply can't be trusted. And this is sort of the overall view of things. It's a very white view of the world. In other words, the racism that existed under Nazism still exists today, and it's still within the UN, it's still within the EU, and it's still, right here you're seeing this, it's within NATO policy. And the thing is now it has a black face called Obama. But the thing is that if you sit down and you peel away the cover, you go beyond the facade, you'll find it's the same old Nazi racism. And the thing is, it's alive and well. It's teaching that there wasn't a Greek empire, that it's all Macedonian, that the Macedonians weren't really Greek, they were Europeans, they were Germans. Well, the thing is, if the Macedonians want to be German, Jihad to you, you're German now. You're not Greek, you're German. I mean, because there was no Macedonia. I mean, Macedonia was the area was names that area after one of Alexander the Great's generals. So there wasn't a Macedonia before that general existed. What happened before Alexander the Great is you had the city-states like Sparta, you had the Carpathians, you had the Athenians, you had a whole variety. Even Sicily was a Greek city-state. There wasn't the concept of nationalism or an empire until Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great, who created the Hellenic Empire, it was his idea, it was his work that created the Hellenic Empire. And if here you have this, he's Macedonian. Well, he himself called, and you'll see this in the history books and the historians from this particular time, calling it the Hellenic Empire. If Alexander the Great called it the Hellenic Empire, he created the Hellenic Empire. There is no Macedonian Empire. And what you're seeing here is you're seeing an attempt by the Europeans, by the Germans, by the white people to eliminate and erase and eliminate the Eastern world, eliminate the Eastern history, and create a false European history. They're trying to create a European history, giving them access to ancient history. But this thing is a complete lie. But the thing is, is that they teach people who will not go beyond, who will not research the stuff, and so it becomes a standard narrative. Anyways, when we go to the other side of this, we're going to continue on and take a look and see what's going on here, how this plays into what's going on in Israel and the Israeli parliamentary election that's scheduled to take place in March. It's a month from now. There's an election in Israel, so we're going to take a look at that when we come back on the other side of the break. All right, take it easy, and I'll see you then.
iNN, uncut, unedited, and real. We deal with issues that other networks won't.
Hi, my name is Dr. Daniel Karras. I'm your host for Headlines and Beyond on iNN. If you like the show we're saying, I do not monetize my channel because there's a lot of copyright issues with this. It creates a lot of problems. So how do I make my money? Well, if you like this show, it's very simple. We do it the PBS format. I ask you for a donation, but I'm not going to ask you for a lot. Or, well, all you have to do is, if you have $1 or $2 in your pocket, take it out, put it in an envelope. I'll give you the address. It will be in the description of my channel. Go to the channel description, go to About, and you'll see the address to send the $1 or $2 that you send. All I'm asking for $1 or $2. If you got $1 or $2 in your pocket, stick it in an envelope. Send it to iNN. That's iNN. The address is 87 Telson Road. It's 87 Telson, Telson Road. That's in Markham, Ontario. Postal code is L3R184. And I thank you for your support. Alrighty.
iNN, provoke, inform, and change. We deal with issues that other networks won't.
Welcome back to the other side of the break. As I said before, we were talking about NATO's Nazi policies, and really what you're having in the in Europe right now is, and in most of the world, you're having a rise again of Nazi fascism. But not only the Nazi fascism, it's fascism on both the left and the right. Because the left is not excluded from the fascist category, and people tend to forget this. They tend to see only the right part of socialism, the nationalism, as being fascist. But the left, Stalin was equally as fascist, equally as dictatorial, equally as evil as Hitler. And so what happens is you have communism on the left, which is dictatorial, which is a totalitarian society, and you have Nazism on the right. That's socialism. Socialism breeds totalitarianism. It is not about freedom. It uses the rhetoric of freedom. You hear people talk about being free and talking about free choice and free this and free that, and how they want to be independent. They don't want the government in their lives, but they're actually not talking about. When it comes down to it, they're not talking about absolute freedom. They're not talking about free will the way the Christians will end up. They're not talking about the early Christians, the original Christians. And these are, again, the Christians that we see today, called so-called Christian right. They're a recreation of Christianity. They're a European creation of Christianity. And it's very white-oriented. It's very oriented to white people. And it's not at all open to people who are not European. And this is what becomes obviously clear to people that this is the case. And so many people are actually turned off by Christianity because they're seeing the European Christianity. They're not seeing the original Christianity, which was Eastern, which was African, which is Asian. They're not seeing the original Christianity. And they have to remind people that Christ wasn't white. He wasn't European. And this is a shocker to people. That say, well, what do you mean he wasn't white? He wasn't European. Europe didn't exist at the time of Christ. There wasn't a Europe at the time of Christ. And this, people don't seem to understand this. That there, prior to basically 800 AD, there wasn't a Europe. So there isn't and wasn't an Indo-European language. That Indo-European thing is a complete fantasy. It was created by Hitler. The whole European Indian thing, which leads back to the Sumerian Empire, is complete fantasy. It was the creation of the SS. The SS believed that somehow the Aryans were descendants, the true descendants of the Sumerians and the Sumerian powers. In other words, Europe somehow came out of the East, and everybody else was kind of, well, you know, they're on the sides. They're the invaders. They're the barbarians, and that was the Germans, the Aryans, who had to save everybody. And this is sort of the white knight on the stallion. They're coming in to save everybody. But this narrative, this sort of rhetoric, is completely false. It really doesn't have any sense of reality to it. And it borrows from all over the place. And this is why, you know, when conspiracy theorists talk about the whole thing with Illuminati, they end up involving the Masons, they end up involving the Jews. In other words, all these different groups are all lumped together, all working together, all part of the same thing. And, you know, as one massive conspiracy. But if you sit down and really look at it as not one massive conspiracy, there are separate groups out there. And a lot of the narratives that they bring forward are completely false. It's a creation, and they're there to create a sense of omnipotence. They want you to believe that they are all powerful, that they have all knowledge, and that they can always follow and track you, no matter what you're doing. And the thing is that if you sit down and look at how power is working, that's what I'm saying. You need to sit down and read Machiavelli's The Prince. You need to sit down and read the works of George Orwell. I mean, George Orwell does sum up a lot of things, but he comes significantly after Machiavelli's The Prince. So if you read George Orwell and see the stuff in there and see its parallels to the political going-ons of today, the political dynamics of today, then you can go back to The Prince and see the same thing in the 1600s. Because The Prince was around the 1600s. So if you can understand that now from the 1600s on, you have sort of a common view of how history is in terms of the mechanisms of politics, the mechanisms of conquest, then you'll have an understanding of why the atomic bomb was significant, why the atomic bomb actually changed the world for the better. I mean, the atomic bomb put a cap on large conquest. You couldn't have large conquest anymore. So now you actually have to have a Cold War. You can't go in and have a large hot war because of the risk of nuclear weapons. And what NATO was trying to do, NATO was trying to find a way, and this is they've been working on this for a long time. This is part of Cold War strategy, is how do you prepare to preemptively strike a nuclear power like Russia, so that you can get them at a point so they don't shoot off their nuclear missiles and end up with a full-blown nuclear war. There wasn't a way before. They're going to try this again now. This is why we're in a very dangerous situation with Obama. Obama's in a situation now where he's not going to be elected again. There's no risk to anything he does anymore. And I think because there isn't a risk to things he does, it's not going to matter to him whether something is bad or good for the United States. It's about his own sense of, well, I want to get this done. It's this whole own sense of propriety, sorry, if you will. And his own sense of morality, if he has one. I mean, most people say, yeah, I'm a moral person, but they define their morality in the way they want to define their morality. They often make excuses and justifications for the evil things that they do. And this is true. There was someone posted a picture of these African slaves being treated horribly by white people. And I said to them, this is a strictly white European view of things. Go into the rest of the world and you'll see that the view of slavery was completely different. That the slavery had nothing to do with race. It had primarily to do with economic situation. It was the rich abusing the poor. It was the rich abusing people, abusing people who simply didn't have the power that the rich did. And that was the gist of slavery. I mean, you see slavery in the Quran. You see slavery in the Middle East. You see slavery with the Arabs. That was certainly in Africa. There was slavery going on, not just between white and black. White and black came in much later on because before then you had black on black slavery. You still have black on black slavery in Africa. This is part of the whole problem in Africa is that you still have slavery existing today, and it's not white provided slavery. It's black provided slavery. I mean, it's really African in its origin. And the thing is, this is true of the Quran. It's true of the Muslims. It's true of the pagans. There is no pagan religion that does not have slavery. The only religion in the world that ever did not have slavery was the early Christian concept of God, the early Christianity, basically from 0 A.D. To about just about 800 A.D. 800 A.D. is when the Europeans came in. The European Christianity began to emerge, and as the European Christianity began to emerge, slavery came back in again through the Europeans. But prior to that, the Christians required anyone, whether they were in high power or not, to either release their slaves or adopt the slaves as children. And this is where you end up having some of the more complex understandings of things in the Greek terminology. And I do have to go in and do my research on this more, do research on the evolution of slavery within Christianity. I think that's going to be for next week. This is something that really has to be looked at. Because there was an exception under the Byzantine Empire that there wasn't the slavery that the Europeans had. And so what happens, you're seeing this whole slavery narrative, something that comes out of a later development as the world becomes more secular and moves away from, Europe becomes more secular and moves away from the Catholic Church, the Christian idea, the Western Christian idea of Christianity, which includes slavery, and becomes more secular. The notion of slavery changes a bit, so you don't have a racial slavery, but now you have, under the European understanding of secularism, you have state slavery. It's not okay for me or somebody else to own slaves, but it's okay for the state to own a slave. This is the taxation view in that you see with Obama. This is all the Democrats, and now a good chunk of Republicans talk about people owing taxes, that we have a duty, this is sort of a civil duty to pay our taxes. But that's nonsense, because there is no civil duty to pay our taxes. We are a free people. If you're a free people, there isn't a tax that you actually have to pay, unless, of course, you're an indentured servant, and that means you're a slave. And the only indentured servants we're indentured to the state here, and that means we are fundamentally slaves of the state. And this is where this rhetoric has to change. But I will once again looked at Nigeria, look at Turkey, look at Kosovo, look at all Bosnia, look at Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, any place where you see the jihadists popping up, and they're talking about what's going on with ISIS now. And it said and this is again a January an article saying fighting against Islamic State militants and other violence was the major factor in the deaths of at least 1,400 people, including 800 civilians in January. In other words, this is in Iraq here, right? Right? In Iraq, you had 800 civilians killed. In December 2014, you had 700 civilians killed in Iraq. This is what they classifies collateral. This is what they classifies collateral damage. Now, consider 800 civilians a month, right? 800 civilians a month is collateral damage. This is the collateral damage standard. 9/11, Charles Hebdo, right? Je suis Charlie, Je suis Charlie, the French protests. Well within the collateral damage standards. These things, the Sunnis, the jihadists, are funded by the United States and Israel. They're being used by the United States and Israel to push foreign policy. It's kind of like the mafia. The mafia will not come in and say, they'll initially come in and say, well, you know what, you need to buy protection from us. You need to be buying our security policy. Because if you don't, these bad things might happen to you. We're here to protect you. But then the guy, the owner of the business, the owner of the place, well, thank you very much for your kind offer, but I think I can handle it from here. Then all of a sudden, something bad happens. A place burns down, someone gets shot, blah, 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 blah. The guy comes back, the security people come back. As I said, You nearly need to buy our security. If you had our security, that wouldn't have happened. And if you look at, and I think most people who watch these watched a mob story knows that the mob is behind, this protection racket. It wasn't by accident that something happened to a business. It was done by plan. It was done on purpose to scare the person into buying whatever security agreement they were selling. And if you look at the policies and you look at where Obama's going, you'll find the exact same thing. You'll find that as Obama plans to go to different places, the Sunni jihadists pop up. They start attacking places, and all of a sudden in the news now you have this narrative: oh, we're under threat. You need to buy our security policy from the United States. And so you need to buy the scanners, you need to equip your airport, you need to have TSA security, you need to have border guards who have dictatorial control and authority. In other words, they are willingly and knowingly creating the conditions for Stanford University's, the infamous Stanford University experiment done by Philip Zimbardo. They're creating the Stanley Milgram case, where they can get the underlings, the people who are under the authority, the soldiers who are simply following order, to go in and do very horrible and inhumane things to average human beings, simply in the name of exercising authority, to ensure that authoritarian control is there. And I think this is what you see in the jihadists. The jihadists are not independent people. These people are well within the attacks are well. They're well within the collateral damage. I just mentioned right now. They're well within collateral damage, and they're well within. They're all well within the Saudi American sphere of influence. And of course, the Americans are not there by themselves. They're there with the Israeli. They're there with Israeli foreign policy. The United States often says this. You can see this, that Israel and the United States walk step in step. That they are very much a partner in things. So when you see this, you see when you see the United States in a particular place, you also see Israeli foreign policy in a place. And the thing is, this is where I've got to sort of point this out, is that there's a tendency to believe that Israel is all on one page, that the Israelis themselves are all on one page. And they're not. They're not all on one page. They're not all agreeing with what's going on. There are a lot of different views and opinions in here. And so you do have, you have to be careful to not say that these are Israelis doing this. In other words, tar and feathering the entire Israeli population, but pointing out that this is Israeli foreign policy. This is Israeli policy. In other words, you're talking about Israeli politics, not about the people themselves. So when we come back, we're going to get into a lot of the psychology on this, and then some of the theology that comes out of this. And there's a lot to learn, and this is what sort of pushed the problem in terms of the hiatus. There was a lot that had to be background research that I had to do to sort of really bring this in properly, and I needed a way to sort of process all that information and bring it out properly, and I did. So when we come back, we're going to get into the psychology of evil and go and see how these things evolve from foreign policy into domestic policy and how they affect the average person on the ground. Anyways, when we come back on the other side.
iNN, uncut, unedited, and real. We deal with issues that other networks won't.
Hi, my name is Dr. Daniel Karras. I'm your host for Headlines and Beyond on iNN. If you like the show we're seeing, I do not monetize my channel because there's a lot of copyright issues with this. It creates a lot of problems. So how do I make my money? Well, if you like this show, it's very simple. We do it the PBS format. I ask you for a donation, but I'm not going to ask you for a lot. Or, well, all you have to do is, if you have $1 or $2 in your pocket, take it out, put it in an envelope. I'll give you the address. It will be in the description of my channel. Go to the channel description, go to About, and you'll see the address to send the $1 or $2 that you send. All I'm asking for $1 or $2. If you got $1 or $2 in your pocket, stick it in an envelope. send it to iNN. That's iNN. The address is 87 Telson Road. It's 87 Telson, Telson Road. That's in Markham, Ontario. Postal code is L3R184. And I thank you for your support. Alrighty.
iNN. Provoke, inform, and change. We deal with issues that other networks won't.
Welcome back, everybody, to we're on the other side of our break, and so we're going to get into the psychology of evil. We had been talking about first, a couple of episodes ago. We were talking about the Talmud, and then I said we wanted to take a look not only at the Talmud. We didn't want to simply restrict this to one particular area, and so then we moved into the Quran. We looked at Islam and the whole situation of sexual slavery, and I found within there, it didn't on search. I didn't go to an interpretation of Islam. I went to an Islamic site. Matter of fact, I went to several Islamic sites, and I found more or less what I was looking for. It's called the Statutes of Mutta. And what the Statutes of Mutta is basically it's prostitution. It's a illegal form of Islamic prostitution. So Islam does have a form of prostitution that's very legal, as long as done within proper, what are called proper contracts. See, what needs to be understood is that both Islam and Judaism are a religion of jurisprudence. In other words, they're very law and orderly. They're founded on law and order. And as long as you can adjust your laws to create a particular formula or contract, then anything within that contract is legal because it's done within the proper legal framework. And that means that's very ambiguous. But this is actually what we saw in the Talmud, is that as long as something was done within the proper framework, the legal framework of Leviticus, in other words, it was properly kosher, it didn't matter what the act was. It mattered that it was properly done within legal context. The same thing applies here to the Quran and Islam. And then here we are, the statutes of Mutta, which are basically the statutes of prostitution. And what do they talk about here? They're talking about using people from a paid position. They point out that the bed of Mutta, like the bed of a slave girl, does not hold the same high position as the bed of a permanent wife. So there you go. Since a wife by Mutta is a rented woman, and there you go. Here's her right there. This is within these. This is from an Islamic site. This is quoted from an Islamic site here, and the man actually has absolute power here. The rented woman, the slave girl, has no rights whatsoever, and because she is a slave, she's not free. And the thing is that understanding this, we understand that now Islam excuses slavery, excuses and uses slavery. Just the way we saw in the Talmud. So the Quran does not make any improvements for individuals, particularly for women anyways, on the whole concept of slavery. So you do have slavery in Islam. You do have slavery in Judaism. It's just the way it's the way it's presented, the way it's written up. You have different terminology, different jurisprudence, but it's fundamentally the same thing. It ends up being the same. And this is how you can actually have the street girls in Thailand. Thailand is in many cases where a lot of the prostitution is in Muslim areas. But you actually have a lot of Muslims involved in prostitution. How do you have that? Well, how can you do it when the Quran says this is not possible? Well, here it is right here. If you look in Islamic jurisprudence, it is possible. And in the Quran, and they actually do quote the Quran and show you where exactly in the Quran it says this. And then this is the problem, is that you're actually dealing with a judicial interpretation, a jurisprudence, when dealing with Islam. You're not dealing with sort of an idea or a philosophy. You're dealing with law. And laws can often be interpreted, and they're often interpreted by the judge. In this case, the judge is the imam. And so as long as something is okay with an imam, they can finally find a way to justify it, then they can do it. And that's how you end up having a lot of men involved in, Islamic men involved in prostitution, because this is something that can be done legally within in the Quran. And the same thing for Orthodox Jews. They can do this as well because they have excuses, they have jurisprudence within the Talmud to get them out of their moral obligations to be faithful, to be nice people. And so this is part of the sex industry now. And the thing is, the whole view of women in the sex industry is to submit women as an object, and then that woman is no longer a person anymore. They're an object. And you see this a lot of the times in the media. They're looking at the breasts, they're looking at the thighs, they're looking at at the vagina. They're not looking at the person as a human being. They're a property. They're a thing. There's something to be owned. There's something to be controlled. And in many cases, something to be abused. In other words, the woman is there for the pleasure of man. The greatest coup that a man could ever have is to convince a woman that this is something that is feminist. That feminism, in order to be part of this whole equality thing, needs to buy into the sense that women can be free and choose the sexual lifestyle that they want. But what ends up happening when you see this, you end up seeing the woman, although coming out and stating this rhetoric of freedom, the reality is they're subjected to the ideas, the concepts, the views that are produced by the male mind. And this is an excellent example of this would be Edward Bernays convincing women to smoke. Again, he didn't come out and actually tell women to smoke. You can't come out and say, "Oh, woman, you smoke now," right? You can't do that. What they did is they paid a group of women who were protesting. They paid a group of activists to go down in a parade in New York with lit cigarettes, calling them torches of freedom. That this was a woman's right to smoke. That women had the equal right. This was an issue of equality. Women had the equal right to smoke. That they could do whatever they wanted to do. This was pushed by a male. This was pushed by a male industry in order to get women to start smoking again. To start smoking. And that's exactly what they did. On the recommendation of a group of women activists who were paid to walk in a suffragist parade in New York. As they did so, other women saw and took up the torches of freedom and began smoking. This was not a thing of equality. It was a PR issue. The same thing with Amelia Earhart. Amelia Earhart wasn't a real thing. It was PR. It was propaganda. It was designed as a stunt. And the thing is, there were other women pilots who were much better than Amelia Earhart. The difference between her and other female pilots is that Amelia Earhart was about publicity. It was about the show. And today you have Miley Cyrus and other women saying, women have the right to go around, bearing their breasts. The breasts are not a sexual organ. And the breasts are sexual organs for women. The breasts are connected to the reproductive system. They're connected to the sexual system in a manner that for their male breasts, they're not. Male breasts are non-functional. They have no function whatsoever. They do not function within the sexual system. The female's breasts do. And so therefore they are part of the sexual organs, they are part of the sexual system. But of course, this is not an issue that they care to listen to. They don't care about doing this research. And of course, Miley Cyrus is getting a lot of PR out of this. She's getting her picture in the newspaper. There's a lot of buzz about her, and of course she's sung a lot of music, she's sung a lot of her album, and her concerts are fairly popular because she's there, stripping on the stage. She doesn't consider herself to be a whore, but she fundamentally, by definition, is a whore. I mean, if you're selling yourself, it doesn't matter whether you're low or high, you're selling yourself. It doesn't matter whether you're a low whore or a high whore, it's the same thing. But of course, because she has money and PR people, feels that she's above the street people. I'm not like that one whore down there. Yes, the whore down there doesn't have a choice. It's either eat or it's either starve to death or be a whore. And of course, the person doesn't want to starve to death. So, if that's the only option, in other words, there's no choice for a low-born whore. If you're low-born, and you're a woman, there is no other choice. This is your way out of starvation. This is your way out of poverty. And you're basically being used as a slave. If you're a high-born person, you actually have wealth and privilege, then this is not something that's forced on you. This is your own choice. And of course, this is where the feminist narrative comes in. The feminist narratives talk about, the feminists were never poor people. You don't find a poor feminist. Feminists were always women of wealth and privilege. They never actually a feminist, the suffragists never actually had a clean house. They had maids to clean house. They had servants to clean house. They had servants to do all these different things. But yet the feminist narrative, is about equality. And of course, this equality here includes, turning women, free women, going into slavery, becoming slaves. And there are people out there who are willing, who advertise, make me a slave, make me, and there is this whole dominant issue in sexuality here, where you actually have people asking to be part of this. Then, of course, you can also train people, you can educate people, particularly kids, to do these different things. So you have a kid from young, you sexualize them just the way Kathleen Wynne wants to. And the thing is, pedophilia isn't about simply having sex with children. All pedophiles groom and teach their children to behave properly during sex. In other words, to accept sexuality as normal. And this is exactly what the sex education program is in Ontario. Yet you don't have this narrative being brought up by any of the politicians. They're saying, the whole argument in Ontario by PATH, by Parents as First Educators, and of course Monty McNaughton, I think it is, isn't it? Yeah, Monty McNaughton. He's the only a progressive conservative who's standing up and saying anything about this. And what they're saying is that they're saying, well, parents should be the first educator. They're not challenging the morality of what's going on. They're not pointing out that what Kathleen Wynne is doing is sexualizing children, and that this is exactly what a pedophile does. They're not pointing out the definition of pedophile in Kathleen Wynne's thing. And the thing is, Kathleen Wynne she initially said, this is what Sweden was doing. They point out to a lot of these other socialist countries who do these things. Well, Sweden has had no problem with, and the same with a lot of Scandinavian countries in Germany, they haven't had a problem since the 1970s, since the 1960s, with child prostitution, with pedophilia. They feel that pedophilia is not a problem. They feel that it's just sex, and it doesn't matter. But of course, if you don't have a soul, if you believe that we're all just animals, then of course sex with children doesn't matter. So you can have sex with an infant, and it really doesn't matter because, they're just an animal. There is no soul. There is no psychology to this. And so they ignore all this stuff. This thing is sort of nonsense or non-existent to them, where it really should be of interest, it should be of concern, but it isn't. So, and the thing is that this is where we can go next, and because you actually, a lot of this sort of socialism doesn't last too long for many people. More often than not, it ends up going into tribalism, and the beginning tribalism that you see from there, and it can actually connect this with within the Quran, within Islam. Islam, where it was stated in the East, it was very close to India. You could sail from Iran or from Saudi Arabia. You could sail to India, and there was a trade back and forth. And of course, with the trade back and forth, you end up seeing over the 700 years from 0 AD to 700 AD, where you have Islam emerging. You can actually see how the Hindu influence of the caste system where you have a highborn and lowborn, you can see the system playing out in the Quran and being incorporated into the Quran. So you actually have a Hindu system, a Hindu caste system emerging. This is where you have the slave girl, the bed of the slave girl. This is the Indian system. This is the Indian caste system, that you actually have different classes of people, and different classes of people have different rights. Of course, the low caste people, the low-born people, have no rights at all. They're basically there for your own pleasure, and they can't say anything about it because they're low-born. They don't have the rights. They don't have the privilege. And this is something predestined by God. God chose these people to be low-born. This is where fate comes in. This is where predestination comes in. And they do. Islam does have a large chunk of predestination. Islam is not a religion based on free will. Matter of fact, no religion except for early Christianity is based in free will now. So when we come back, we're going to take a look at this and see how this sort of plays out more with what we see today, what the actual results are in terms of open sexual society, and this whole argument that is now being brought forward by Kathleen Wynne, and we're seeing a lot of people saying the argument of consent. What is consent in terms of sexual activity? When we come back on the other side.
iNN, uncut, unedited, and real. We deal with issues that other networks won't.
Hi, my name is Dr. Daniel Karras. I'm your host for Headlines and Beyond on iNN. If you like the show we're saying, I do not monetize my channel because there's a lot of copyright issues with this. It creates a lot of problems. So how do I make my money? Well, if you like this show, it's very simple. We do it the PBS format. I ask you for a donation, but I'm not going to ask you for a lot. Or, well, all you have to do is, if you have $1 or $2 in your pocket, take it out, put it in an envelope. I'll give you the address. It will be in the description of my channel. Go to the channel description, go to About, and you'll see the address to send the $1 or $2 that you send. All I'm asking for, $1 or $2. If you got $1 or $2 in your pocket, stick it in an envelope. Send it to iNN. That's iNN. The address is 87 Telson Road. It's 87 Telson, Telson Road. That's in Markham, Ontario. Postal code is L3R184. And I thank you for your support. Alrighty.
iNN, provoke, inform, and change. We deal with issues that other networks won't.
Welcome back to the other side of our break. This is our fourth and final segment. We're talking about how the sexual situation, the whole system evolved. There's a lot of history here. We connected Islam back to Hinduism, and once you get in Hinduism, you can now move forward into secularism, because secularism actually borrows a lot from the Hindu influence of multiple gods. And then, of course, when you have multiple gods, you have polytheism, you have a polymoralistic society. In other words, you have multiple moralities. And it depends on the god you believe in that determines what your morality is. And this, in many cases, includes rape. It includes a lot of the sexual activities you see in terms of child rape. There's the belief in child rape, actually, in Hinduism. And these things can actually be pulled forward in seeing, particularly with the caste system. The caste system can be seen in Judaism. The caste system can be seen in Islam, between the difference between highborn and lowborn. And it comes into play in many cases into Europe, where you see highborn and lowborn people as well. You see the concept of slave girls. It's in Africa. It's in most of the world. You can see this whole concept of highborn and lowborn, where the highborn believes that they have the rights, they've been given the rights by a higher power or life itself, that they are in these high positions, they're doing well, and that therefore they can treat people who are beneath them as such, as property, as objects, and they don't need to be dealing with consent because the consent was given to them divinely. But of course, if you're an atheist and don't believe in God, this is what happens in Europe, and you have a secular system. The whole art, they bring up the rhetoric of art, and this is what Kathleen Wynne has done, brought up the argument of consent. Say, well, this is an issue, we're teaching consent. The problem is more of an issue, a legal issue, of what consent is. And what they're doing is they're bringing up the issue of consent. The thing is, they're trying to get kids with the curriculum to be more sexually understanding, to be more sexually tolerant of the environment. In other words, they're trying to get kids to say yes more often, to be more permissive. And that's actually what the term permissive means, to be to permit something, to say yes to something, to consent. In other words, they want the consent to be automatic. They want the consent to be common. The problem is when consent, when permission, when permissive, when permit is common, it then becomes extremely difficult in court. Because if it's common, if consent is common, because permissive is common, then consent, because permissive is assumed, consent is assumed to be true. And unless the girl can prove this otherwise, go against the common knowledge, there's no way a girl can win. And most girls understand this. They understand the system is against them. They understand that and this is what girls talk about. They talk about the first rape is the rape by the person. The second rape is done by the system, and the rape by the second system is a lot longer, a lot more prolonged, and repeated. And the reason why? Because the system, the more permissive you have, the more permissive the society is, the more consensual the society is, the more difficult it is to prove consent in court. In other words, legally, by teaching kids what they're teaching them in school about sexuality, it makes it impossible to bring pedophiles or predators into court and to give them any degree of sentence that is worthwhile. This includes human traffickers. And this is why, when you look at the reports by the advocacy groups for human rights victims, the victims of human trafficking, there's a lot of different groups out there advocating for protection to try to end sexual slavery. But they don't realize, and they look at this, and they don't really sort of point this out, that the record highs, the places where sexual slavery high, is not in closed off sexually areas. They're not in conservative areas. They're in sexually open areas. They're in liberal areas. It's, in other words, liberalism. It's the social. It's the Kathleen Wynnes who create the record volumes and the demand for sexual slavery, because they're creating essentially a permissive society, the society that views consent as normal, as in something that normally happens. And this is not the case here. Because you see the damage. You see the damage that is done. If you have a person who is stating that they want these things, they want to be slaved, they want to be used, they want to be degraded, they want to be peed on, they want to be crapped on, and this actually does happen. If you see that they're drunk, and that every night after night, they're going home passed out, with this being done to them, this is not consent. This is a psychological problem. This is a psychological illness. And the person who is taking advantage of this is doing just that. He's abusing the person who is not able to consent properly. But this is not going to be brought up in these courses here. This reality isn't going to exist. It doesn't exist in the internet. It doesn't exist in the videos that are presented on the internet for kids to consume, which are very sexual in orientation. There is nothing left to the imagination anymore on the internet. Parents who think, oh, my teen isn't doing this, my teen isn't, or kid isn't seeing this. It's in every single movie. It's even in Disney. So there isn't an escape from seeing the stuff. It's a matter now of how do you deal with a highly sexualized society that encourages children to become sexual. And the thing is if the sex professionals of Canada really want to help their members, and these members of the sex professionals of Canada really do have a lot of problems. They do have a lot of time. If they want them to take it seriously, then they have to deal with the psychological issues, the psychological damage that sexuality causes. They have to consider that. They have to consider the soul. Because without the soul, there is no psychology. Of course, without theology, without the concept of morals, there's no point in talking about the soul. Because the soul runs on morals. The soul runs on theology. That's how you define the soul. This is where your things are. You can do a lot by observation. As a matter of fact, my argument is not to use Christian theology, the original Christian theology, to point things up, but rather to look at observation and compare different theologies, the way I've done with the Quran, the way I've done with Judaism, the way I've done with Islam, the way I've done with Hinduism, and eventually we're going to get into secularism and the socialist background. That's the socialist theology. And eventually we're going to get into the whole thing called neo-paganism and neo-tribalism, which also presents its own moralities. And you'll see that a lot of the excuses in morality that allow for open sexuality really cause a lot of problems. You'll see this is where you have your sex slaves, this is where you have your alcoholism, this is where you have your drug addiction. And in the end, when they hit 30, 40, hit their 30s, this is when a large chunk of these women end up in mental institutions. This is how they end up on the streets. This is where you have your homeless problem. And these are something that if you want to really deal with these problems, you want to deal with mental illness, you want to deal with the homeless, you really do have to start looking at these particular issues and not sort of shy away from them. But as I said, the outrage over what Kathleen Wynne is doing, and of course the Ontario Liberals are all for this, the teachers are for this, the unions are for this. There is no issue being brought up by, in terms of the sexuality, in terms of the morality here. Even those who oppose the new sex education law in Ontario. And this is an example, because this is going on a lot of different places, but if you want to sort of see the sort of dynamic of things, this is a place to look at it, because it is happening. It's going to spread throughout Canada. It's going to spread throughout the United States. And it's already happening in a variety of American cities. And again, it's being spearheaded by the socialists, by the liberals. And I got to make a clear a distinction here. The socialists, we always often talk about the socialists as being the leftists. There is a socialism wrong. The Nazis are socialists. They're simply socialists on the right. So it's wrong for me to say socialist. When I'm talking about the common view of socialism, I'm talking about leftists. I'm talking about libertarians, the people who view themselves as liberal. And they all support this. And what you'll see in Ontario, and this actually happens in Ontario, you'll see an increase in sexual slavery. You've seen an increase. The reports that Ontario now, with successive liberal governments in both the city and in the province, now have the highest rates of child poverty ever in Ontario. You have the highest number of people using food banks in Ontario ever. We're in record numbers. And yet these socialists, these liberals, don't see this. They say, oh, we need to be doing more of what we did before. And they don't understand that their policies are creating the poverty. But then again, it keeps them employed. You can't, if you don't have these poor people, you don't have the downtrodden, you don't have the ability to have large governments. You can't have these agencies. You can't have a lot of the government things that you have. You can't have if people are all doing well. Government needs its victims, particularly the socialist governments, needs its victims in order to survive. That's its lifeblood. So it's going to create its own problems in order to exist. And as I said, the only one that sort of stood up and said anything was Monte McNaughton. And even he's not really talking about the morality issue. He's talking about why weren't parents consulted about this. They're talking about, again, legality. They're talking about procedure, that the procedures for bringing in the sex education program was wrong. PAF, parents as first educators. Again, it's about procedure. Parents should be the one educating the kids about sex, not the schools. That's the argument there. Again, no issue of morality. They're not talking about morality at all. And the question is why? Well, if you really start bring out the issue of morality. The only place you're going to see issues of morality here is here. When we talk, we're going to look at morality. We're going to look at the morality of the situation. But that's how you look at the psychology of the situation. That's how you look at the psychology of evil, is through the lens of morality. And unless this is properly understood, properly dealt with in this type of environment, then you're not going to understand it. You're not going to understand how all these things sort of fit together. How this actually, what we're seeing, is a result of foreign policy. Domestic policy often comes out of foreign policy, and these policies are all basically they're the formula for these various different theologies, whether it's secularism, it's socialism on the left or right, it's Hinduism, it's the Islamic State, it's the Judaic state of Israel. No matter what state it is, or even the Christian Empire, it was known as the Western Europe, all these things run on theology. All of the politics run on theology, whether it's foreign policy or whatever. There was always and that's how law works out too. Law is a branch, an emergence from morality. It's an emergence from theology, and all these things are intertwined. And unless you understand this, you're not going to understand a lot of the intricacies that are going on in the news, because the news is the surface. Your headlines are your surface. In order to understand what's actually going on beyond the face, you actually have to lift up and sort of see and start digging below and start seeing, well, what is the structure down below? How does this actually function? How does one thing interconnect with the other? And these are kind of the questions that we ask here. This is what we look at. This is what we analyze. And so, yeah, we're not going to always be on a regular basis, because if something needs to be researched properly, then I'm not going to come out and just simply plop out something that doesn't make sense or that is not properly researched. I'm never going to finish the research. The research never end. You just simply pick a point where it's good enough and you go with it. And that's kind of what we're doing here, because I'm still going to be researching this later on today. So it doesn't end. I will see you in the next edition of Headlines and Beyond. I think I've corrected enough of the problems so that I don't need to be taking a hiatus again for our next couple of months anyway. So I will see you for the next edition of iNN's Headlines and Beyond. My name is Dr. Dan Karras, and I'll see you then. All right, bye-bye.
Welcome to the library, and I am the librarian. I am the professor. And professor of what? Professor of physics.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light?
Free speech rules here at Democratic Earth.